and welcome to Great British Ghosts. Today I'm in London, which certainly has more than its fair share of hauntings. Later on, I'll be going on a historic ghost walk. But first, I've come here to the Grenadier pub in Knightsbridge, which has an intriguing story about a soldier. The Grenadier is a tiny pub tucked away in the cobbled streets of Belgravia, which has a colourful history. It was once used as the officers' mess of a nearby army barracks and is said to be haunted by the ghost of a young officer who met a sticky end in its cellars. London historian Richard Jones agreed to show me around.
So this is one of London's most hidden, historic and haunted pubs. It started life as an officer's mess, and that's why we have all this military memorabilia around the walls, hats, guns, swords, pictures of soldiers, etc. And in the days when it was an officer's mess, the story goes that a young soldier was caught cheating at cards, and this just wasn't the done thing, and his mates were so furious they subjected him to a flogging and a beating, and they accidentally killed him. Now nobody knows exactly when this happened, if it did happen, but tradition maintains it was in September. So September's the month when a lot of the paranormal activity tends to happen here. And just over at the bar here, there was a very bizarre happening in the 1970s when a police detective was standing at the bar and he sensed someone standing next to him and looked around and he could see cigarette smoke, but there was nobody next to him, no cigarette at all. So he reached out in the direction of the smoke and suddenly screamed out and pulled his fingers back, having burnt his fingers on an apparently invisible cigarette.
So how do you explain that paranormally?
We can't. It's just one of the bizarre things that happens in this haunted pub. And something even more bizarre happened here in the 1980s. A TV crew came to film here one night, and the brewery sent a photographer along to get some souvenir snaps. And the photographer photographed this corner here. And in that window, when he looked at his photograph later on, he could see what appeared to be a sort of a very hazy face. And he got a bit of a ribbing from everyone who saw it, saying, "Oh, it's obviously you can just see the shape of the trees there." So he blew the picture up, fully expecting the image to sort of split apart and divide as he blew it up. But instead, it got clearer and clearer. And they actually saw that it was the face of a young man with a handlebar moustache, face pressed up against the window.
And is it thought that that's the soldier that was killed?
Some suggest it was the soldier that was killed. Others aren't too sure, because obviously so many people have passed through this pub, and any one of those could be the ghost that comes back to haunt it.
How do you explain the face in the window?
Well, the face in the window is an interesting one because it's something that's actually caught on film. The sad thing is I can't trace this photograph, because I would love to see the photograph, because then obviously I'd be able to look at it and draw a conclusion. But often you do get ghosts all picked up on film. People will take photographs of a window, they might take a photograph of a corner, and something that's not there at the time, when they actually come to look at the photograph, they'll see something there that they hadn't seen at the time. So I think it's to do with the fact that everyone was concentrating on other aspects of the pub, and looking at the window wasn't really high on their agenda, and it's only when he'd taken the photograph, gone away, and then looked at the photograph closely that he actually saw the face. You get a lot of hauntings up here in the bar itself, so a lot of customers experience it, but of course there's places then the staff can go, and that's a very haunted place as well, and that's the cellar just over here.
The cellar's always haunted, isn't it?
It's always a haunted cellar, but this one's particularly haunted.
It is amazing, Richard, isn't it, just how many pub cellars are haunted?
Oh, very much so. It's there's always something in the cellar in a pub, or someone. There are lots of stories about things happening to people in the cellar having sort of a closed tug. They've felt people shoving them in the back, things get moved around. In fact, an old landlord who was here was so wary of the ghosts that he actually had a crucifix that he placed in the cellar, and that was there for the entire period of his tenure.
It's actually not too bad, this cellar, is it?
It's not too bad. It's very low.
Yes, it is low, but it's not one of those really dark, horrible places.
Not oppressive. It's not oppressive, but it's a fantastic little location, because lots of sort of strange things happen down here. And folklore maintains that there's actually a tunnel here that goes from the Grenadier and goes to Apsley House, number 1 London, which was the home or the house of the Duke of Wellington, and he could use the tunnel supposedly to get back and forth in privacy without having to go through the London mob or having to tread in all the filth that scattered the streets in his day.
So the Duke of Wellington could just walk through the tunnel and come here for his pint of beer?
Folklore maintains, yeah, he could just come out, have a drink, sit at the bar, and then make his way back, no matter how sozzled, back to his
That's
house.
so cool. And what ghosts have been seen down here, or paranormal things?
Down here, it's not so much ghosts are sighted as ghosts are experienced. Strange smells is a popular one. People get a sort of a nauseous smell in the air. People working away down here have been pushed. People have had their clothing tugged. People have felt someone standing behind them and been certain there's someone behind them, but when they look round, there's nobody there. So it's a place more where you experience or sense things than see things.
Richard, why do you think it is that cellars are often haunted? Is it because they're a safe place for ghosts and spirits to stay?
I think it's a lot to do with the fact that the atmosphere of the cellar, it's conducive to a good haunting. And also, if you actually look at the walls here as well, these thick walls, and who's to say what memories are trapped within these walls? And if we believe in the stone tape theory, then those memories sometimes come out of the walls, people pick up on them, and they'll see scenes played out before them that were laid down many years or even centuries ago. There's a theory that ghosts are sort of emotions. It's called the stone tape theory, that ghosts can be emotions that are left behind. And of course, we tend to associate ghosts with fearsome, horrible acts, murders and beatings to death. But of course, a lot of ghosts are happy ghosts. They don't necessarily have to be miserable. And if you've actually enjoyed yourself somewhere and you've then gone off to the trauma of war or something, then perhaps your thoughts would turn back to your last night. Maybe they'd spent the last night here. Maybe they'd had their last happy time here. And it's that brings them back time and again.
While we were filming in the cellar, a strange thing happened. A spare light bulb fell off the shelf and onto one of the tabletops.
I've been working here 3 years. I've never experienced anything supernatural or anything to do with ghosts until today. As soon as you guys came down, I've had this little item stored up in this little cubby hole there, so I can, it was a dead one, ceased to function. And I was keeping it for measurement purposes when I would buy some new ones. 3 minutes after you lot went upstairs, it drops on the floor. That one surprised me. It's been there at least 3 weeks and it's never moved.
Although the current landlord is a self-confessed skeptic when it comes to ghosts, he did have a weird experience.
Well, I've only been here a short while and I've had one strange experience, and that was in the cellar. I was downstairs counting the stock, and while I was down there, I felt my shirt being tugged. So I don't really believe in ghosts anyway. I turned round and there was nobody there, and I just ignored it. I thought it might have been a bit of static or something, or my shirt got caught on something. Anyway, it happened again, and I turned round and I actually saw my shirt moving like this. And that was really weird, but anyway, I thought it might have been somebody playing a joke or a trick or something like that, and I called for Pete, who's the old cellar boy, and he came down the stairs and said, "What?" So I just said, "Somebody's pulling my shirt," and he just laughed and said, "It's probably the ghost," and walked away. And that's my only experience here at the moment, but I've only been here for a few months, so who knows.
As far as ghost stories go and hauntings go, pubs are great places to tell stories. People sit round and they swap stories. And so you've got landlords who come here, they'll have a ghostly experience, or a customer will have a ghostly experience, and then they'll pass it on to someone else. And of course, we've got the oral tradition is kept so alive and so vibrant in the haunted pubs of London.
The Grenadier pub is a real hidden gem in the streets of London, full of atmosphere and history. And quite frankly, it would be a travesty if it wasn't haunted. With such a rich history, the City of London is a fantastic place for ghosts and ghost stories. And one of the best ways to hear about them is to go on a historic ghost walk. Thousands of tourists go on ghost tours around London every month. And judging from the reviews he's had, one of the most popular is led by London historian Richard Jones. He's been doing it for over 20 years and has written several best-selling books on the subject. So when it comes to London hauntings, he's definitely the man to follow.
So this is Smithfield Meat Market, and this is Europe's largest market. It dates back to 1868, and it still is a working market. Starts work at midnight, finishes 8 in the morning, and it's slap bang in the middle of one of the places, historically speaking, one of the most gruesome parts of London. And around here is where it all happened. There are places that we don't really know why they're haunted, but we're now coming to a place we most certainly know why this is haunted, because for many centuries this was one of London's main execution grounds. And one of the most gruesome forms of execution in the Middle Ages was that of being hanged, drawn and quartered. And it was here at Smithfield that this man here, Sir William Wallace, Braveheart, was brought on a 23rd of August 1305, and here he was hanged just for a few moments, cut down and then castrated, and then the skill of the executioner was to actually cut you open and to keep you alive for as long as possible, so they could then take out your innards and burn the innards before your very eyes.
That is gory and miserable.
Horrible, horrible. And then cut into quarters, and quarters pinned up above the various gates. And his head was actually pinned up or posted up above London Bridge, on the south side of the bridge, so that people coming towards London would see William Wallace's head there and be reminded of the punishment awaiting all those guilty of treason. So it's really no wonder, with all the executions going on around here, this is a most really haunted spot. And people who work here till the early hours of the morning said that from time to time they hear anguished and agonised screams carried on the breezes, and they smell, sometimes because people were burnt alive here, so they smell a smell not unlike the smell of burning flesh. This is the Hospital of St Bartholomew, and it's the oldest hospital in London to still stand on its original site. It's occupied this site since the year 1123. But from a paranormal perspective, it's a haunted hospital, because within the labyrinth of these buildings, there's a lift, an elevator, which the staff have poetically dubbed the coffin lift. And it's so called because it's a wooden lift, it's tiny, but also it's got this unnerving habit from time to time. If people go into the early hours in the morning, it doesn't matter which floor they press for, the coffin lift takes them straight down to the basement, lights go out, and it won't move. So after a few moments of madly pushing the buttons, they'll get fed up, pull the gates open, start to walk up. Lo and behold, the lift's waiting for them on the ground floor with its gates open and its lights on. So now they think enough's enough, and they'll start to walk up to the level they require. As they do so, very slowly, the lift begins to follow them from level to level to level. And to give you some idea of how unnerving it is, it's an old-fashioned elevator shaft where the stairwell goes around the open shaft. So as you're walking up, you can hear it and see it creaking just a few feet beneath you. You stop, it stops, continue your journey. The coffin lift creaks into life and follows you step by step by step.
That is very weird.
It's a creepy tale. It's one of the best-known stories of the hospital. The point about London is that it's been in existence for 2,000 years, so you've had demolition, rebuilding, and the consequence is that the burial grounds have often been utilised into building spaces, so plague pits will often be built on. And we have what could be tombstones. No one's actually certain what these are. They could be tombstones.
Certainly look like tombstones.
But we're here in the most bizarre places. But as we come down the passageway, there's something quite bizarre about this passage, because it's a passage that officially has a name, but in reality it doesn't. You can actually see, if you look on the wall here, where the name should be. But every time they put the name sign up, it gets stolen. Another one goes up, it gets stolen. In the end, they just gave up altogether.
What's it called then?
Well, I can't see the attraction. Why anybody wants to steal a name that says Back Passage is beyond me, but steal it they do. Personally, I blame the medical students from St Bart's Hospital. But here we have the pub called the Rising Sun. And this pub is synonymous, or was synonymous, with the resurrectionists, the sack-em-up men, the body snatchers. And they're the people who go out into the early hours of the morning and dig up the bodies of the newly dead, which could then be sold to doctors at St Bartholomew's Hospital and then used for medical experimentation. Now, whether the body snatchers have got anything to do with the hauntings here, I don't know, but strange things happen here. Barmaids who live on the premises, they've long grown used to the covers being tugged off them in the dead of night by an unseen hand. Others have the worst experience. They're lying in bed at night when the bedroom door will creak open, and they'll sense that someone or something has entered the room. They can't see anything or anybody, and it gets worse. Whoever it is, sits down on the bed, and they can feel the pressure of where it's sitting. They can even see a depression where it's sitting. They just can't see anything or anybody. And then in 1990, its then landlady was enjoying a shower one summer's afternoon, and she thought she heard the bathroom door open and then close, and she called out, no response. And then, you know when you get that feeling there's somebody standing behind you? Well, she got it, and she froze in horror as the shower curtain pulled slowly aside, and the very next moment, an ice-cold hand ran down her back, and she turned round, and there was nobody there. Now, Now we come to this building here on the other side of the road, and this is the oldest parish church in London. It's the Priory Church of St Bartholomew the Great, and it dates back to the year 1123. It was founded by a monk named Rahia, and Rahia now lies buried inside the church. And in the 1860s, they decided to open up his tomb and see how he was getting on. And they discovered his body was perfectly preserved, even down to his garments being intact, right down to 2 leather sandals on his feet. So they closed up the tomb and away they went. And a few days later, one of the officers of the church fell sick, and on his sickbed confessed that when the tomb was opened, he had stolen one of Rahia's sandals, gave it back, he got better, but it never went back inside the tomb. And from that day on, Rahia has haunted the church. And it's mostly late at night he appears, this hooded figure who comes out of the gloom. He brushes past anyone who stands around, and as you turn around to acknowledge him, he shimmers and melts away before your eyes.
And is he looking for his sandal then?
Supposedly he's hopping mad looking for his sandal.
Hopping mad. Did you just make that up, or is that a regular one?
Spare of the moment, that came to me. I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Butterworth. There's an interesting ceremony around this tomb that goes back several hundred years. But if you had arrived here 100 years ago, around this tomb here, on Good Friday, you'd have found a group of poor widows, and silver sixpences would be dotted all the way across the tomb. And the idea was that he left a bequest for poor widows every Good Friday to come here and remember him. And so they would take a silver sixpence, and then they would turn and they would take a hot cross bun each and make their way off. And that ceremony was a really popular ceremony. Nowadays, there's not that many poor widows in this parish. So nowadays, they actually do use the choir boys or the church officers. And it's gone up to 20 pence and a hot cross bun and a glass of sherry for those who attend.
And why did he do that?
Nobody knows for certain the origins of the custom. Some say that it's because he died a bachelor, and he was so terrified nobody would remember him that he left this bequest for the poor widows of the parish to actually remember him. So here we are in Cock Lane, and it's in Cock Lane in the 18th century that what many people consider to be London's most famous ghost story ever occurred. In fact, in Cock Lane in the 18th century, there lived a man named William Parsons, and one day he took in a lodger, William Kent, and his mistress, Mistress Fanny. And Mistress Fanny had been the sister of William Kent's wife, but they moved into the Parsons household. And then a few weeks later, William Kent went away on business, and Mistress Fanny was so afraid to spend the night alone, she took him to bed with her William Parsons' 11-year-old daughter Elizabeth. And that's when it started, because she was woken in the dead of night by these noises coming around the wainscoting. And she lay there terrified, and she heard this scratch, 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 and then this bang, bang, bang. And it absolutely terrified her. And so the consequence was that when William Kent came back from the business trip, his mistress was on the verge of a breakdown. So they moved out, and a few weeks later, Mistress Fanny died and was buried in the crypt of St. John's. And that's when the noises started again. So Parsons began charging people to go into the house and listen. And all these scratching noises seemed to centre on his 11-year-old daughter Elizabeth. So she became something of a local star or local celebrity. But then Dr. Johnson stepped in and exposed the whole thing as a hoax. He got a midwife to reach up the girls' dresses, and she found 2 rough wooden boards strapped onto the girls' legs. And it had just been a complete hoax. For the knocking noises, she was knocking her knees together. Scratching noises, she was scratching her legs together. And Parsons ended up 2 years hard labour for fraud. But in fact, the ghost was then assigned to the pages of London history under the absolutely wonderful name of Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane.
That is a fantastic story, but I must say I'm recovering from a heart attack myself.
There you have it. Well, there's a hospital over here. Well, we've arrived on London Wall, and this really shows what London's about. We've got the modern buildings here, and almost lost amongst them, you've got this Barbican Tower from the old Roman wall. It goes back to AD 200, so we've gone back 2,000 years into London's history.
So this must be a place where there are ghosts.
Well, this has what is perhaps one of the oddest ghosts in London. There was a letter sent into one of the city newspapers in 1912 when a reader wrote in to say he was passing a segment of the old Roman wall late one December night, when all of a sudden a hand reached out of the wall and slapped him across the face. And he spun round, and as he did so, he saw a tall, dark figure striding towards the wall. And as he watched in amazement, it just melted into the stonework. And that was it. He was out of there that night, but the next day he came back, determined to find a natural explanation for his experience, but he couldn't. And he came to the conclusion he'd been assaulted by a ghost.
And has that ever happened since?
No, the only thing that's ever happened is on the walks I do, several people have taken photographs of the segment of the wall, and they've actually had a face on the wall has appeared. But this really is a historic spot, because just over here is the Church of St. Giles Cripplegate. And this was the scene of a very bizarre 19th century tale when a lady who lived in the parish died, and her husband went to the church and he asked, could she be buried in the crypt in her wedding dress with the wedding ring upon her finger? And it was a perfectly reasonable request, so the church allowed it, and she was laid to rest in the crypt. But the church warden had noticed the wedding ring, and that night at midnight he and his wife came back to the church and they prized open the tomb and they tried to take the ring from her finger, and it just wouldn't move. So they took out a pocket knife and began to slice into the flesh, and then made the discovery she wasn't dead. She was suffering from narcolepsy, so she came back to life. They ran away. She staggered out of the coffin and she picked up their discarded lantern, and holding it before her, she came walking home through the streets. And then she knocked on her door and she knocked, and eventually the maidservant heard, lit a candle, came downstairs. She opened the door and screamed out at the top of her voice, seeing her mistress there in the doorway. And she went racing to the master, saying to him, wake up, wake up. And he said, what is it? She said, you'll never guess who's downstairs. Your wife's come back from beyond the grave to take us with her. And he went down, he found her perfectly alive. He gave her a hot drink, put her to bed, and she went on to live for another 35 years. And when she finally died, she was buried back in the crypt and given the nickname the Cripplegate Ghost.
That's like a living ghost, isn't it?
Exactly right.
Oh, my heart is definitely weaker after this tour.
Well, I lived in London for about 15 years of my life and I didn't know most of that history. I must say some of it is quite shocking and some more light-hearted. But going for a walk with Richard is certainly a very entertaining way to hear about both the history and the ghosts. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Next Friday, Martin Shaw is the detective coming to terms with the brave new world of 60s Britain and a shocking case of long-buried abuse. Inspector George Gently is new at 9, but next, El Alamein, the soldier's story.